Hello, and welcome to another episode of In Bed with Books. I'm your host, Melissa, and today we are joined by author Margaux Eliot. Margaux, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I am Margaux Eliot. I guess my given name is Julia Fine, and this is my first book under the name Margaux Eliot. So I'm excited to be here giving an interview, I guess, in her place as her. It's a whole confusing world of pen names after having published three books under my own. But I'm excited because this particular book is like the reason it's under a different name is because it's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit sexier.
Mhm.
Um, it's about early 2000s reality TV, whereas the other ones are literary spooky. And this one I just like leaned full on into sort of romance. I don't know if cheesy is the right word, but like
I think
Y2K,
it
Y2K vibes.
fits like cheesy in the best possible way.
Mhm,
The book,
mhm.
by the way, is Honeymoon Stage. So good, so good. I think you really, in more ways than one, captured the reality TV style, like in the context but content of the book, but also in the writing.
Thank
But
you.
before touching on the book itself, I do want to talk about the pen name thing a little bit. What was the decision then to do that? Was it just the palate cleanser
So
or?
it's funny because my agent, when I first pitched her this idea, I had pitched it much more in the vein of my other work, which is all I have three previous books, What Should Be Wild, The Upstairs House, and Madalena in the Dark. And they're all sort of like gothic, speculative, sort of dark, spooky stories. And when I pitched this initially, I was like, what if I do that, but for Newlyweds, Nick and Jessica, the MTV show from 2003. And she's like,
Yes.
okay, I guess you could try it. But then I sent her the first, 75 pages or so, and it was very clearly, there was nothing speculative about it. It was much more commercial. It was much more fun. Not to say that my other stuff isn't fun, but this one, like, there's a lot of like tongue in cheek sort of, and it's just a different type of writing. And so
Yeah.
at that point, she suggested fairly early on, she's like, maybe we want to do this one under a pen name. And I pushed back. And then when it was done and we were going out with it to sell it, and we were sort of like, talking about like final touches and things, she brought it up again and she had all of these reasons why it would make sense. And the one that sold me the most is like, if you picked up some of my other books and you were like, this is too weird for me, or this is too spooky, or this is too dark, it wouldn't necessarily turn you off of this one. Like, it feels like it's a different lane. Like, I think if you liked the other ones, there's a chance you'll also like this and vice versa. But they are very distinct in terms of what they're doing and the audience that I think would most appreciate them. And so she sort of sold me on like how fun to have one spooky speculative lane and another like more fun pop culture lighter. I say lighter, it's funny, but it's not like
I was
it's a fairly dark book, but
I
like
was gonna say
comparatively.
you can definitely like see the bleeding over, and I
Mhm.
I will say I think that's probably my favorite part about this is like I I'll preface this by saying actually, listeners, we are gonna talk. Spoilers will come up. We will not give out big spoilers. Um, I'm gonna talk around it as much as I can. There's the part where we find out kind of Jason's past secret, and you reference the telltale heart, and in her like conversation with herself about how Maggie must be dealing with this, which even the way she handles Maggie is very like white woman in a gothic story, where it's like there's this kind of infantilization even as she uncovers like, oh, Maggie's smarter. For more chapters she's still like, oh, that must so hard for her, and you're like, okay, but you know that like she's manipulating. How are you still letting
Mhm.
her manipulate you? And I
Mhm.
love that. I love that you've like encased it in this modern uh even the setting, like by having it as reality TV, that itself feels like a commentary on what's
Uh-huh.
gothic now.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I like that a lot. Maybe I should go back and change the
No,
But
this
yeah, no, I mean, when I wrote them too, like to me, they feel very much of a kind. Like it's like this is just the same book. Like I can't remember who said it. I think a lot of people have said it that like as a writer, you're always sort of like writing the same basic story, but you've sort of changed the scenery around. And I feel like it's the same story that I've written, now four times. But this one is like such a drastically different scene that it
Mhm.
deserves like But yeah, and a bigger thing too, like if you want to read this book, I think with my other books too, there's an element of like it is difficult to go into them and say like, I just want to sit back and like sort of have some popcorn and enjoy the ride.
Hmm.
Like you can't really do that with the other ones because there's just so much other stuff going on. This one, I think there's like, if you're somebody who wants to just sort of like go on a fun roller coaster of a plot, you can enjoy it. Or if you're someone who wants to like dig a little bit deeper and look at sort of the way that society is complicit in creating these people, or look at the way, some of the things we would have hoped we would have left behind in the early 2000s, like still are pretty persistent today. Like
Yeah.
there's other levels to it. So that's the hope, is that like somebody can come in, read the book and be like, I just want to like have a fun, sort of mindless whatever, and just like, go for the ups and downs. Or you can go in and you can read it and be like, I want to think about what all of these things mean on a different level.
Oh yeah, I think that is very clear. Like you've accomplished that very much in this book. And I begrudgingly occasionally watch reality TV. Like sometimes it
Uh-huh.
just sucks you in and you
Hmm.
can't like
I
stop
know.
yourself. Most notably, and this is not like a plug or anything. This isn't like or I'm not getting paid or whatever. Uh, I believe it was the most recent season of Married at First Sight. I kept seeing the commercials and I kept seeing the commercials. It's like they're in the teens now. I've never watched an episode, but the commercials were all like first time and Married at First Sight history. And I was like, well, shit, now I have to know what happened.
I
And
know.
that's how this book felt. Like
Well,
like
good,
if
I
yes, in like a
guess.
good way where it's like the way you've structured it, it feels like there's parts that feel like a confessional.
Hmm.
Like the
Hmm.
talking head and like the way she's narrating it
Yes.
as
Oh,
well
I'm
as
so
the
glad you
timeline.
saw
Yeah.
that.
But
Yeah.
that is also, as somebody who's like, and I'm sure you have as well, like studied Gothic literature, that is also an element of Gothic literature where it's like we can see her, Cassidy, the main character, falling deeper and deeper into this like almost psychosis. Like she can't break out of this spiral that she's fallen into about like what actually happened to Sally Ann. How does nobody seem to be worried about this? And so it's even though she seems to be the most well-adjusted person in like the production crew who's responding normally, I would say, to, what happens in the context of the book, she's kind of like seen as like
The
quote unquote
crazy one.
crazy.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's so fun to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I really love about Gothic literature too is there's always an element of like you're getting like again like the sort of the talking head confession of like you're getting this person's perspective on it. Clearly something is behind. Like and we
Yes.
can't quite see what it is. And reality TV, like that's exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And generally when you're watching it, if you're watching Married at First Sight, you're not necessarily thinking like, well, if you're me, you are, but a lot of people are not necessarily thinking like, what's going on just outside the camera frames.
Hmm.
But for me, I've always been, I mean, I remember like in college, I had a group of friends who were really into The Bachelor. And so I sort of was, it felt like an anthropological, like going to watch with them the first few times. And then of course I got sucked in by then and the way I don't know, I haven't watched it in years, but I did have a good like 2 or 3 year period where like I religiously watched The Bachelor. But I was always more interested in like, how did they get someone to say this on camera? Or like, is
Yes.
that really what's happening there? Or like, does she really believe this? Like, I think the elements to me that always were so interesting were like how much of it is production and how much of it is
Hmm.
real. And in my research, I found that there are things that you think are real that are absolutely not. And then there are
Yeah.
things that you think must be fake, but like, no, these people actually buy this. They believe this. This is how they're feeling. And this is
Hmm.
what, you know, nobody's like bribing them to some of these things.
Yes, I think what we forget as like viewers on these things sometimes is that when you get people in essentially a confined space, even if it's like a perceived confined space, humans want to escape. And so they're gonna do like it brings out a whole different side of them.
It really does. And then when you take like taking away like on a show like The Bachelor or like Love is Blind, like they take away their phones. They have
Yeah.
no books to read. Like they can't, get access to like literally the only thing they can do is like drink alcohol and talk to each other about the other people on the show. So it's like, what are you
Yeah.
gonna do? Of course you're gonna end up the way you end up.
It absorbs their entire lives.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
I can't the whole thing about like no books and magazines when I found that out about The Bachelor, like
It's
I don't
crazy.
know how you could do that. So you just are like stuck. Like there's no escape.
Yeah.
What should I do?
Yeah. And I like going back to that, gothic mental illness, spiral, psychosis,
Mm-hmm.
imposed psychosis. It feels like that's what they're trying to like breed on
Mm-hmm.
shows where they have to do that kind of like complete removal from society because as humans we need that. That's like, in gothic literature that's part of the reason we see a lot of isolation. And then in this Cassidy is isolated in that the period where like leading up to the big event on set, she even admits later on like she was so isolated. When she's removed from that, oh, she has more time to go out. But
Mm-hmm.
like it sets this whole precedent where like she's already ready to fall down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she was not going in with like a solid mental foundation
No,
when
no. Yeah, her out like the hours, and this is like based on sort of the hours that like I would assume that it has continued, but like specifically the hours that people who worked on reality TV in the
yeah.
early 2000s were working. And I read a lot about the Osbournes, which was the
Ooh,
first like celeb reality show and like
yeah.
the production of that show. And it was like, oh yeah, they're just these people. Like the production assistant just lives in the Osbournes house because like you never know when something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um, so unhealthy. Really
Yeah.
bad. So,
Yes, there's also this like this theme throughout the book about like privacy and boundaries.
mhm,
And I love the moments where you make it clear how aware the cast, like Maggie and Jason
mhm.
are, like when he starts clapping so they can't use the audio.
Yeah.
And even though Cassidy clearly just assumes the best of these people, and that's like so sweet for her, like don't let the world harden you kind of thing, but also like learn as you're
Mhm.
going along. But yeah, I liked again that ties back to, you know, Gothic commentary back then, which was I think technically nowadays we don't include Dracula in this, but Dracula was obviously drawing from Gothic literature previously. And the whole crux of the story happens when Jonathan Harker isolates himself in Dracula's castle, has no idea what's actually going on, and you have to read between the lines a lot. And that
Mhm.
feels like very similar to this, where it's like he's been invited into a space where, or she's been invited into a space where she doesn't necessarily need to be, and she's almost certainly actually not welcome. She is an individual, and she can't contend with that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think the mental gymnastics that she does
Yeah.
of trying to justify her being where she is definitely contribute to sort of the spiraling as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So then I want to talk a little bit about why this setting, because
Mhm.
I think it fits so well. Was this like, did you realize that going in, or was that just something you kind of uncovered as you went along?
So the way that I came about, like the reason that I wrote this book basically, is it was I saw some random article that was like, it's the 20th anniversary of this. And I felt like, oh my gosh, like 20 years, this feels like it just was yesterday. So I
Yeah.
clicked on it and was like reading through it. And there were some things where they like showed little clips of it. And I was appalled at all of it. Like
Hmm.
just the way that, like particularly the way that everybody was treating Jessica Simpson as if she was an idiot, which, like, that's part of the gag, but, like, in really ways of, like, you know, infantilizing her and
Hmm.
saying totally inappropriate things, and, like, the marriage did not look healthy or good at all, and she seemed like she was, 12 years old. She was 22, but she seemed really young, and it just, like, it took on a whole different light because when I thought back to it of being, in as it was airing or a little bit after, sort of in the culture around it and the way that, like, the pop culture embraced it and, like, how much she was a punching bag, it made me angry, and I was really mad,
Yeah.
and I was like, "I feel like there's no way that she, you know, was not more in on this than we imagined her to be." And also, like, why have we never it feels like a lot of the young women, were in the eye of popular culture around that time period who just people just ragged on them. And, like you could look at like Britney Spears or like even like
Yeah.
Monica Lewinsky of just like people being manipulated, like young women being manipulated and being sort of bearing the brunt of all of this weird social stuff. And so I thought, like, okay, this is interesting to me. And then I also thought, like, how, what what better place for this type of sort of like psychological drama? And initially I was going to have it be speculative, but it didn't really work out. But then like a reality TV show about a marriage was so interesting to me because like marriage is, at least in my own experience, like there's a lot of it, like you sort of have to like fake it till you make it kind of situation
Hmm.
anyway. Like I think in all relationships with people, like there are
Yeah.
moments where like you're annoyed, but you have to just power through, or like you compromise, or you do this, or you do that, or you present to the outside world in a way that is not exactly what it's like at home. And so it was really
Yeah.
interesting to me to think about how people would sort of use putting a marriage on reality television, especially at this point in time before people really, like, there was no social media, there was
Yeah.
no way to like self present, like self fashion. Um, and so the combination of all of those things, but it seemed just like very obvious to me that I wanted to use like Calabasas, the place where the MTV show took place, just seemed like such a perfect
Yeah.
spot because it's like there's like parts that are like naturey, but like very artificial feeling, and it feels very manufactured, and yet also there's like some creepy, like the lighting is just creepy on that to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
I find like LA, um, like the hills are just sort of creepy like I don't know. So it felt like a good place. And when I started writing, I was using Nick and Jessica as the jumping off point, and
Yeah.
ultimately obviously went off in all sorts of different directions. Like I would never want to implicate Jessica Simpson in any of this.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But
And I will
but
say, I loosely remember Jessica Simpson, but a lot of Maggie's like behavior reminds me now of what we know about Britney Spears.
yes, she was also a huge influence.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
especially with the like, I guess they both at some points had to play like the ditz. Um,
Yeah. There's
but
a few interviews there too where I like basically it's like such a
yes,
thinly veiled. It's like if know if you've done any reading or research or watched any like pop culture, there's like a Diane Sawyer interview with Britney Spears that basically I like pulled and just sort of slightly added, like I don't know, it's an homage, I guess. I don't know.
yeah,
Or at least trying to, it's the kind of thing where I just it when these things happened, and like it was always the young women who bore the brunt of it, or it wasn't like how
yes,
could you be asking a 16-year-old if she's a virgin? It was like, oh my gosh, can you believe she wouldn't answer that question? Like I just,
yes,
so that just the society, the way that we accepted that is problematic to me, and I really wanted to unpack it and sort of look at why we thought that was okay, and like has that changed, has it not changed? So that was part of the sort of question in the book for me as I was writing it, was sort of like what about this feels particularly of the era, and what about this feels sort of like a universal way that American culture is.
yeah. And I liked to not like, but in that like interview situation, you have this much older woman who's secure in her career, essentially like denigrating to her face a younger woman who's at the beginning of her career. But then in the same kind of mirror, you have Lauren who
Mhm.
is using Cassidy through a lot of this. And at first it seems kind of like when you're in the 2002, 2003, like the early timeline, you're like, oh, okay, maybe something happens. Maybe Lauren isn't as bad as the wedding day Cassidy is like talking about her.
Mhm.
But then you just see like the cracks in the pedestal as like, worse things start to happen. And each time that Cassidy's like, oh, there's going to be like, we have an emotional response to this because we're humans, and Lauren doesn't.
Nope. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
so there's this kind of like comment as well of older women reinforcing
Yeah.
same systems that are like keeping Maggie in this. God, there was one line you had, and it was something about like putting her on a pedestal to look up her
Oh, to look
skirt.
up her skirt. That's one of my favorites.
I loved that. But these women are also like helping build the pedestal at the same time that they're
Mhm.
like putting the cracks in it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is a very the like girl power of the early 2000s, and I think to a certain extent I think this still is the case, but I also like to think that sort of generationally some of us woke up to it and we're like, wait a second, this still feels very patriarchal.
Yeah.
But I think at the time, even when you look at like I don't know, I kept thinking about the Spice Girls, like, as, I grew up on the Spice Girls, and it was, like, girl power, and looking back on that, it's like, that doesn't like, that feels like a capitalist, sort of patriarchal,
Yeah.
like, ploy, and that was being sold to us as empowering, when really what it was, like, reinforcing these different roles, and I
Mhm.
think that, I mean, as is so often the case, like, you can see it all across the board of, like, if there isn't an equal playing field and a woman gets a little bit of power, like, it behooves her to keep that power and
Yeah.
do whatever she can to everybody else. Like, there is no, it's not like a rising tide carries all ships in, especially in the world of, like, corporate
Yeah.
capitalist early 2000s America. Um, so to that extent, I think Lauren to me is a character too, who's very much like, she's very smart and she knows what is possible for her and why it's possible for her, and she's willing to just, do whatever, and she, in one version of the story, Cassidy might have been like, "Yes, this is who I wanna be too."
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think there are just a lot of people out there who it's sort of, if you can't fix the system, you might as well take advantage of it.
Yeah. Like Lauren was very much I'm gonna close the door on my way through the glass ceiling.
Mhm, mhm, absolutely.
Um,
Until I need you, and then I'm gonna be like,
yes.
"Hey." So,
Yes.
yeah.
And so she's like, degrading Cassidy in the same conversation where she's
Mhm.
like, yeah, if I have work. And we find out later that that's an honest offer. Um, but there's also the side of this because, Lauren, I wouldn't accuse her of having the best moral compass, as we find out through production of
Mhm,
the show. But then we find out her dirty little secret.
mhm,
And then she
mhm.
can no longer hide her dirty little secret. And, 9 months later,
Yeah.
that dirty little secret is pretty obviously saying what the issue was. And so I think there's also this like she's falling into the same traps. The only difference is she was cutthroat before that happened.
Mhm,
And so there's also kind of this question of like what happens to her now? Like how can she step out of this like partnership with Dan, who
mhm.
she seems to hate love, and
I
she
think
can't
yeah,
now,
yeah.
one way or
I mean,
another.
she's tied to him forever.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for
yeah.
at least the next 18
Uh-huh.
years.
Yep, so mhm.
And
Yeah, I find to me, it sort of feels like Cassidy is one end of the spectrum and Lauren is the other, and
yeah.
Maggie sort of vacillates between them, and there's so many, like, both Lauren and Maggie, I think, probably did start out a little more cutthroat and a little less, like, sensitive than,
Yeah.
or just willing to do what it is, but also just, like, the pressures of this particular world also, like, Hollywood is not a kind place for women,
Yeah.
particularly in the early 2000s, and, like, it's still, was very much a man's town,
Yeah.
and they're trying to get in whatever way that they can. And Cassidy sort of is just sort of twiddling her thumbs, sort of oblivious to that
Yeah.
because that's who she is. She's got her own stuff to deal with, but she doesn't quite like, she hasn't yet committed to sort of like, I'm willing to sell my soul for this dream because,
Yeah.
is it worth it? She has to decide. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this kind of brings me to the like Maggie Gabe
hmm
parallels and the commentary that you're making here on like child stardom,
yeah.
because it's very easy again to like look at Maggie and for the production crew to be like, "Oh, she's just a ditz." But also you don't get that far by being a ditz,
hmm
by just being beautiful, because there's plenty of people that are just beautiful. She learned how to play the game and at a young age.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and you see that like the way that for her it's kind of become this like this telltale heart, like she can't escape it.
Mhm.
But for Gabe, he was able to drop it and he didn't have the pressures of being a woman in this space.
Yeah. But he also
I love
isn't as
that.
successful. So it's sort of
Yeah.
it's a, you there's give and take in
Yeah.
how much, and I think about this with like just celebrity in general and people, like what do celebrities owe their fans, and have you agreed by being a public, like if you're a movie star or a singer, like have you then agreed to just be a public figure in all aspects of your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a tricky balance, and especially today where it's so easy to have access through social media.
Hmm.
Um, it just is, I don't know. I think there is, if you say I want to be famous, like there's a downside to that too.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of a comment that I was writing many times in case viewers didn't catch all of my tabs.
uh
Um, because Cassidy brings it up a lot once her and Gabe are like solid, and she's worried that, it's her that's keeping him from making the agreement
mhm.
with Maggie. And I don't think she like fully catches as she's like, in this past timeline or past events that it's not any better if she were to like sell her, like if he sold
Yeah.
his soul to Maggie, basically.
hmm
Like it wouldn't solve anything. There's still all of this baggage that
Yeah.
surrounds them working together, that surrounds Maggie, that would like change the very dynamic of anything he's doing.
hmm
And I found that to be like, that's the difference between child stars, him having removed himself, knowing what's on the other side of that, and Cassidy like thinking, oh, that just makes everything easier, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, there's such a particular, like, this book was so fun to write because I just read a lot of really interesting, I read like several child star
Oh,
um,
nice.
memoirs. And it's really interesting to see, like, obviously they're written by the time the child star is an adult. And often they're writing a book because they have the time and space to do it because their career is not where they maybe had hoped it would be, or they decided to go in a different direction. But when you think about with a kid, like, it's like, the promise you make to these young people, and you're like, this is what the world looks like, and they're not old enough to have any perspective on anything.
Mhm.
And it really, I mean, can really mess with people. And a lot of them end up with like drug habits, and a lot of them end
Yeah.
up, having all sorts of issues, because it's like you give it to them and then it sort of gets snatched away because they're no longer a cute little
Yeah.
kid anymore. And it
Yeah.
just sounds terrible.
And I think one of my favorite examples of that is Miley Cyrus,
hmm
who I still support endlessly. I think I've
I
talked about
love
on the
her.
podcast before. Yeah, she's so like a masterclass in just fucking owning her sexuality and
hmm
and dropping the Disney persona.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
And being able to like look at it objectively,
mhm.
say, this is what I would like, and like go after it in a way that
Yeah.
I think it helps to have like financial security, and it helps to have a career behind you, but like it still is scary to say like, okay, this is what I know
Mhm.
the corporate higher ups want from me, and then this is what I'm going to do instead. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And first of all, I love this just because I love celebrity gossip shit and
hmm
everything. Something else that Gabe's story and at some points kind of remind me of in terms of like, he kind of in terms of career peaked with Tiger Crew,
hmm
like with his ability just to be a star. And it in some ways reminded me of like Daniel Radcliffe and Harry Potter or Kit Harington with Jon
mm
Snow. Two
hmm
people I believe Daniel Radcliffe did. Don't actually, I might not, but I know like Kit Harington went to therapy and rehab after finishing because
yeah,
it had been such a defining role. And I know for sure that he went to therapy, Daniel Radcliffe, afterwards because he basically had to come to terms with the fact that like nothing he ever did again was gonna be on that scale or be
hmm
as like big as this. And he basically came to the conclusion, he's like, but nobody else will ever have that either.
yeah,
And like now you see him doing just weird shit just because he
I love
can.
him.
Yes, and like he's on Broadway half the time, which is awesome. And so I think you see that like the way it can treat boys and girls as they
hmm
move through that much
Yeah,
differently.
yeah. My book doesn't go into this quite as much, but it seems like so clear that like you need to have a good support system
Yeah.
around you if you're going to be like a kid actor, because you can get like your head can explode. Like it just
Yeah.
is. You think like again, like it's the lack of perspective that like all kids have, um, but in this weird environment. And artists are weird too. Like so to
Yeah.
put a kid in so that artists, like
Yeah.
it just is a it like the kind of people who get into who like go into the arts as a career
Mhm.
are either like you've got sort of the Lauren corporate head guy who's like on his phone in the corner, um, and then you've got the people who probably would work the kid for 15 hours straight to get the right shot
Yeah.
because that's just where their mind is. They're not bad people, but it's what do you prioritize and how do you learn how to prioritize? And so much of,
Yeah.
I mean, that happens for every kid, but if you're a child star, then clearly for Maggie, like, okay, what do we prioritize? It's these things. And that's
Mhm.
at the expense of a lot of the things that probably could ultimately have made her a more fully rounded, happier person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also liked, because, at the very beginning here, we talked about, or you brought up the isolation of
Hmm.
like Love Island, The Bachelor, The Bachelorette,
Yeah.
those kinds of shows. And that's almost essentially what happens to the kids when they're younger because they all go to school together and
Hmm.
it's on set and it's barely school. It's
Yeah.
like just enough to qualify for like state legal
Hmm.
stipulations and they're spending all of their time together. So it's like, yeah, of course some of these kids are going to come out and they're a little weird, like to put it lightly,
Yes.
if they've adjusted well enough. But yeah, so I loved that there's kind of this recurring of like how we're isolating each other even as we're, you know, putting it out there for everybody. Kind of back to that private public dichotomy as well. When you wrote about the tabloids coming out after the like third season or during the third season and during the second season and how when they found out about what happened to Sally Ann, everybody felt like it happened to them too because they all thought
Hmm.
that they were Maggie's friend. So by the transitive property, they were also Sally Ann's friend. And like that parasocial commentary, like in a time like where it's being born in this book,
Yes.
that was
Hmm.
so fun.
I mean, it's so interesting to look at how that has like traced through too. And like how, I mean, I feel like Taylor Swift, like we can't not talk about
Oh my
Taylor
God,
Swift when we're
yeah.
talking about sort of like how a pop star sort of moves the chess pieces. But like the parasocial stuff with her is fascinating to me. And yet it's a crafted, like that is like she has decided,
Hmm.
or, back in the day, she decided, this is the access I'm going to give. This is sort of the way I'm going to interact with fans and all of that sort of the early aughts pop stars and reality TV stars too were sort of setting the precedent for that. And
They
also
were
like
like,
influencers too, I feel like came
yes.
out of that sort of celebreality world.
Our need to see like what we think is behind the scenes.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think the hardship with the early aughts was that it wasn't figured out yet. In the book, in Lauren's case, that's great because she can just do whatever she wants.
Yes.
She's ready to like really go for it. And I firmly believe that like Sally Ann's situation would have made an episode had it turned out any differently, even slightly differently.
Hmm.
Now, because of those early aughts in real life and also in the book, like we have people like Taylor Swift. And I also want to be clear, like, it's not just Taylor Swift who does this. Every celebrity has a
Oh
full
yeah.
team of publicists and marketers, straight up from
Hmm.
like, a corporate level down through to social media interns. It's really common on social media now to see them doing little like reels and shorts and shit with their like the teen social media manager. Just like, look at how real I am. I have just a teenager working for me. It's like, that's
Uh-huh.
not real, but also makes it less unapproachable or like more approachable than saying it's a team of 12 people that completely, you know, shape the way we perceive you.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that it's always been like that. When you think
Yes.
about like Hollywood studios and the way they would own the stars and like the
Hmm.
PR relationships that got set up in like the 40s. Um, it's the difference now is like the level, it almost feels like the level of involvement of the celebrity themselves. And I think Taylor Swift does an expert job
Yeah.
of making it seem at least as if she is like at the reins of all of the different decisions. And she probably is. I don't know. She's done pretty well for herself. But the difference between sort of looking at her and looking at Jessica Simpson, sort of in the Newlyweds era, talking on the phone to like a record executive about how, oh, you want me to sing worse? Like it
Yeah.
just is such a different, it's such a different time. And to look at like all of the, like there's so many different moving pieces that got us, but it's very interesting. And I think there's definitely been progress, at least for, young, wealthy pop stars.
Yeah.
Since of how much
Yeah.
control I have. So,
Yeah, it's funny how much progress you can make as an individual when you have a lot of money and like the resources
yeah.
to do so. Yeah. If you're down to talk about it, I also think a really good example of this is the Blake Lively Justin Baldoni
Oh,
situation.
yes. No, absolutely. I mean, I sort of have followed it casually and that it pops
Yeah.
up in my algorithm as it does everyone else. So that has not so much lately, which I think maybe it's quieting down. But yeah, no, the weaponization of
Yes.
not just the tabloids, but sort of like different fan groups and
Hmm.
bases, and it's so it's so interesting. And you sort of know like the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but you are compelled to pick a side. And that is, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's modern American life too, where there is
Yeah.
no more nuance. We just have to pick a side. But
You're
when it
either
comes
Team
to
Edward or
just
Team Jacob.
exactly.
Yeah. Or, Team Blake or Team Justin.
Yep,
Yeah.
you can't say like, "Huh, maybe they both did bad things," or maybe
Yeah.
everybody's right or everyone's wrong. Like there just isn't room for that.
Hmm.
And so much of that is like marketing.
Yeah. And because we found out later too that like the PR firm that Justin hired and how that immediately preceded very bad stories about Blake coming out, which may or
Mhm.
may not have actually been true, but doesn't also erase what may or may not have been done by him. It did
Yeah.
remind me in the book when you were talking about the Jason versus Maggie in the
Mhm.
public eye,
Mhm.
especially going back to the interview that she had where the newscaster or the interviewer was very, very hard on her. But then when it came to Jason, she was
Mhm.
like, that must be so hard.
Mhm.
Oh, you're
Oh, I mean,
heartbroken.
that
Yeah.
is like every celebrity breakup of that
Yeah.
period. Like the Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake,
Oh,
Jessica
yeah.
Simpson, Nick Lachey, like all of the I guess like Brad and Angelina is a whole separate thing, but that again is a very like whose side are you on kind of
Yeah.
situation. But specifically for like the younger women whose careers were taking off. Like it's like
Hmm.
I don't know. It's truly amazing. Like, did you read like I would recommend Britney Spears' memoir to everybody
Okay.
because it's just fascinating to see like, oh yeah, I do remember the time when everybody was like being so mean to you
Yeah.
and treating Justin Timberlake like a prince. And then like I mean, this is her side of the story,
Yeah.
obviously, but like it every relationship, there are two people in that relationship. It's not like she just woke up one day and was like, I'm gonna drop you. Like it
Related to this, but I also want to call out one of the lines that you've got in the book. Nowadays, it's like Justin had that whole music video where he's like alluding to her being in the shower and him sneaking in, which did not age well. I don't think it
Mhm.
did well at the time, but also didn't age well. But then at the same, like around the same period was when he, decupped Janet Jackson on TV, and she's the one who like bore the brunt
Bore the
of
brunt of all of it. I know.
yes.
Yeah. No.
Yes, even
It's
though he very clearly, without any kind of
mhm.
warning, did that. I don't think his reputation is that strong anymore.
Uh-huh.
Um, not since,
Yeah.
the tour, but
It was
um
ruined.
it's the tour's
It
ruined.
was ruined. He
Yes.
ruined it. Yeah, I think though, so one of the decisions that I made pretty early on too was to make Jason not a pop star, like to make him an athlete
Yeah.
instead. And a lot of that, it I think there's a way in which like sort of we idolize, our obviously we idolize our movie stars and our celebrities, but like the athletes, it's like a whole nother level. And I've always been, I mean, there's so many, it's interesting from, like the high school football players who get away with, being abusive or
Yeah.
sexual harassment or whatever else it is because they're good at football.
Yeah.
All the way up to various scandals with, football players or baseball. They're all across the board. There are stories
Yeah.
of like, we know this guy's, does bad things, but he's so good at sports. So
Yes.
that was really
Wild.
interesting to me too, is like the way that we, idolize people. And then also, I mean, and so much of the book is about talking about identity, like with Maggie, her efforts are all it's sort of how does she maintain this identity and like what happens and like once the bubble pops, like who would she even be? And with Jason, it's sort of like, oh, the thing that he thought he was, he can no longer be. And like, what does that lead him to do? So there's a lot of similarities there, I think, in terms of just like the way that um, these positions were set out for them. Because, you know, being like a really talented child athlete and being a child star, there's a lot of commonality there in terms of like, what do you prioritize? What do you focus on? What do people, you know, appreciate you for? What do you appreciate yourself for? What are you proud of yourself for? And so it's like, oh, you're an athlete who has an injury early in your career. Like that also is totally destabilizing, not just physically, but like from a mental health perspective. And so I was really interested in that for him as well. And it doesn't like excuse him, but I think it puts him in perspective in a way.
It was a lot more fun to explore, I think, because if you were to have another pop star, he could have
Yeah.
reshaped himself somehow, but because he was an athlete and the one thing he could do, he could no longer do, like that's a
Yeah.
completely different ground to be starting from.
Mm-hmm.
But and
Yeah. Yeah.
I loved that because there wasn't any question about he is for the most part riding her coattails at this point
Mm-hmm.
because he won't get hired. He can barely even play golf. Like there's
Yeah.
not much that he can do in his field of choice. And usually, you know, athletes can get to maybe their mid 30s if they're lucky being as successful as he was. But then there's also the, you know, she's much younger. I think it was Jen at one point who makes the comment. She's like, yeah, girl is the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the age gap between them. And I think tying this back to young women bear the brunt of these situations is you have this line where you call out basically like they've somehow figured out that Maggie is too dumb to like use basic appliances, but also so smart that she pulled the wool over on Jason's eyes.
Yes.
Like the public, the tabloids, the
Yeah.
interviewers, they are not reconciling this at all. They're just letting,
It
yeah.
it feels like that is the story though of like every
Yes.
young woman who we trash. Like I think a lot too about like obviously with politics so it's different, but like Monica Lewinsky, I
Hmm.
sort of read a lot of and like have I don't know, I admire her so much because the way that she has sort of come out the other side of the way that um everybody treated her is really amazing. Very resilient. Because again, it's like, oh, so you're simultaneously, you know, a temptress who lures these people away from their whatever and like an idiot kid and it just nobody I don't know it the way at which everybody is so eager and like the Blake Lively thing shows it again like we are still so eager to just jump on
Yeah.
young successful women um and I think every like I don't know anytime a celebrity makes like one little false step or a person in the public eye does one small thing. Like it's vastly different. Like it's the people who are generally operating in good faith. When they do something wrong, we jump all over them. And then there's like the alternate, which is the people who we know are operating in bad faith. And we're just like, whatever, we'll just let them, you know, be a mess. And it's
Yeah.
just
It's almost like we
wild.
expect it from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't surprise us. It's like
Yeah.
when Leonardo DiCaprio dates another 22-year-old woman, we're like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, he started over again. Dang it,
Mm-hmm.
Leo. But when, you know, let's look at oh, I can't remember their names. The woman from American Horror Story who's dating the much older woman.
Oh, Sarah Paulson
Thank you.
and
Yes, Sarah.
Holland Taylor. Is that
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yes. And so the commentary that came around when they got together, and it's like, well, first of all, Sarah Paulson is like
An adult.
an adult. Like her frontal lobe is fully
Uh-huh.
formed.
Yeah.
And also, why are we not talking more about the Leo thing if we're going to have these conversations and
Mm.
not just as a joke? Like he regularly dates much younger women and we're just like accepting it as fact and it's just his quirky thing.
Yeah.
The weird balance of they're calling Maggie girl at the same time that they're talking about how she has these womanly wiles that are like tricking men essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
Gabe in the tabloids being her new meat or whatever the phrasing is that they use and it's like okay, or they're just at lunch, or like there's
Mm-hmm.
any number of situations where it's like can men and women just exist without this like specter of whatever
Mhm.
like monstrous, like, I don't know, Lovecraftian,
Yeah.
incomprehensible thing, you know?
And the other thing too that I was really interested in, especially for Cassidy, is sort of like when your job is to try to see all the angles and try to piece things together, like how much does that bleed over into your real life? Like
Yeah.
how do you can't really turn off the like, oh, this would make a good story if we set this up like this. And like once you and on a larger scale to sort of extrapolate, like once you start suspecting everybody of having a secret and of hiding something from you and of, things, nefarious things going on, it's like really hard to break out of that mindset and be like, oh, he's just a dude who wanted to sit, like the
Yeah.
big secret is, whatever it is, like you think like, oh my gosh, is he hiding this huge thing from me? And it's like, no, this is just like a normal life thing.
Yeah.
And I think when we're trained on, there's like the reality TV in which we look at it and we are like, oh, let's accept this as what's really happening. But then there's also the side of watching reality TV where you watch it and you're like, oh, well, I wonder what's going on behind the scenes and what strings are being pulled. And we know it's not real. And again, like with all the other stuff, like the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Um, and there's like a danger in going too far either way.
It's easy to become suspicious to begin with.
Hmm.
And then when you have to do it for this job, there's just there was no other path for Cassidy other than
Yeah.
getting super suspicious and other than even down to like the what happened to Sally Ann. Like
Hmm.
there was not really any reason to be suspicious in the first place, but she had to find a story. So when she
Yeah.
created the story, she suddenly believed it was true. Like she fell victim to the very thing she was trying to do.
And also the way that we create stories to avoid feelings of guilt.
Yeah.
Like a lot of hers comes out of like she feels guilty. But it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to find an explanation,
Yeah,
than to
it's
really sit with
actually
that.
Jason's fault. Oh no, it's actually
Mhm.
Maggie's fault. Oh no, it's
Yeah.
actually Lauren's fault or
Hmm.
Dan's fault or Vinny's fault or
Yeah.
Ian.
As
Yeah.
opposed to like it was a crazy accident,
Yeah.
and I played a part in it. Yeah.
Which again, very traumatic thing to go through, and so that makes sense.
Hmm.
But yeah, uh this was I wanted to touch on other questions, but this was a very like very fun conversation about all these things. Okay, final questions then. Let's start with, do you have any advice? Just a couple of pieces of advice for people looking to publish their own writing.
Yeah, I think my advice would be to find something that sort of obsesses you or is super interesting to you and really lean into that because you can create something out of it. And if you're really into it, like clearly I am very passionate about like justice for, Jessica Simpson.
Yeah.
But anyways, but it will be, I think you can tell when someone is obsessed and when someone is really like heightened and into it. And I think that shows up in the work. So I would say like follow the thing that you're into. And if you're not into it, it's okay to set it aside and find the thing that you are into.
Awesome. And then a book recommendation that
Oh.
for anybody, like the one book that you always recommend.
The one book that I always recommend is probably Jonathan Strange, but I feel like people have already read that.
Okay.
Um, so I'm going to recommend a book that's coming out in October, so it'll already be out. It's called A Play About a Curse by Caroline Macon Fleischer, and
Okay.
it's about a theater student, a playwriting student who puts a curse on her mentor, and it's told in this like hybrid play. Um, Novel. It's like a novel and a play at the same time, and it's so dark and creepy and wonderful. It's definitely for readers of Julia Fine as opposed to Margaux Eliot.
Okay.
Probably, but it's wonderful. It's coming out from Clash Books at the end of October. A Play About a Curse by Caroline Macon Fleischer.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna add that to my list because that
You
sounds
should.
right up my
It's
alley.
good. So
Okay.
good.
Okay,
It's like
cool.
very creepy, beautiful, interesting. Again, like about obsession, which I always love. So
Awesome. Well, thank you. Honeymoon Stage is out now, so go get it. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.
thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, I had a really good time. So, uh, thank you for joining us today, listeners and viewers, and make sure to like and subscribe so you can find out more. But otherwise, happy reading. Thank you for joining me for another episode of In Bed with Books, a bookish podcast for bookish babes. Make sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of the latest updates. And if you have any suggestions for authors, books, or topics that you want to hear about on the podcast, then feel free to DM me on Instagram or shoot me an email. I'm wishing you a lovely rest of your day, and until next time, happy reading.